Hi, my name is Emma Myers. I am the program manager at REEF. Since President Biden was inaugurated about a month ago, we've heard a lot about immigration reform. And we know that many of you are asking, how are these proposals going to impact us? Will they become actual laws or regulations? And if so, what is the timeline? And so we've put together this series of videos to explain the mechanisms by which a bill in Congress becomes a law. That's going to be the focus of this video, or the mechanisms by which a proposal becomes a regulation within the executive branch. What do I say? What do I mean when I say executive branch? I'm talking about the president, the office of the president, the staff that support the president, and then the federal agencies that the president has authority over. This includes the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs and Immigration Services, USIS. The president is vested with a great deal of authority to deal with immigration. That power comes from the Constitution. We talk about that whole aspect of the process in a separate video. You can see the link in the description to this video. This video is going to focus specifically on how a bill becomes a law with reference to President Biden's proposal to Congress, which he shared on his first day in office. President Biden's immigration bill proposal, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. It's the comprehensive immigration bill that he shared with the Senate and with the public on his first day in office, and which got a lot of news coverage in the first days of his term. We're going to talk a bit about what's included in that. And then separate from that, the process by which a bill becomes a law. As I said, this process is separate from executive orders and the regulatory process. That all happens within the executive branch. Here, we're going to talk specifically about Congress. And before I continue, I want to offer a couple words of caution. First is that this is an incredibly complex process. What I offer here is a very, very basic overview. So keep that in mind, please. The second thing I'll say is that this is an evolving process. For example, just because President Biden shared this comprehensive immigration bill, this proposal with Congress and with the public on his first day in office, doesn't mean that that's the final product, or that the final product, the laws that Congress passes this term related to immigration, are going to look anything like that. And so for that reason, I warn that things could change. The goal of this video was really to create a explanation of the process by which a bill might become a law. That way, as we're listening to the news and hearing about developments, we can return to this resource to understand where things fit into the process and the timeline. First, what's in President Biden's proposal that's related to affirmative asylum? There are two main things. First, the proposal eliminates the one-year deadline for filing asylum claims. Second, the proposal provides funding to reduce the asylum application backlog. It's important to note that in the US government, Congress controls the money. And so if the president wants to request the funds to expand a current program, like, for example, working through the backlog, he or she, the president, has to receive that funding from Congress. It's important to note that Biden's proposed bill has not been introduced yet. When a bill is introduced, that's a procedure. It's very specific and in both houses of Congress. And I'm going to get into what all this means later on. But it's a procedure that happens. That means that Congress can officially begin considering the bill. The Citizenship Act of 2021 has not been introduced in Congress. President Biden has just shared it with Congress. So what can we expect from the proposal moving forward? First, as I said, the bill still needs to be introduced. By sharing the bill on his first day in office, President Biden signaled that immigration reform is a priority for him. It was a largely symbolic gesture. Now begins the hard work of taking that very comprehensive bill and thinking about realistically, how do we get the pieces of this through Congress? Since President Biden shared the bill with Congress, his administration has signaled that they're willing to break the bill into pieces and to address topics within the bill one at a time, which might make it easier to get some of these elements that are more divisive, on which Democrats and Republicans tend not to agree, to get some of those pieces through Congress. What would it look like if we broke the bill into pieces? It might be that we get a bill on DACA, in fact, deferred action for childhood arrivals. This is the protection for children who are under 18 years old who come to the US illegally. In fact, one bill has already been proposed or introduced that focuses just on DACA. It might be a bill that looks specifically at the issues facing the southern border. It could be another bill that looks specifically at enforcement, or a fourth bill that would look specifically at the affirmative asylum process. That's what we mean, or that's what the Biden administration means when they say they're willing to break this very comprehensive proposal that included a lot into pieces to make it more feasible to tackle each piece one at a time. We get this question a lot. What is the timeline? When can we expect this to happen? There are two factors. And I apologize, these bullets are in reverse order, but there are two factors. The first is that immigration is the Biden administration's third legislative priority. It's the third priority for them to work with Congress, or issue area. The first is COVID-19, and we see right now Congress is debating another stimulus package. The second is an infrastructure bill that aims at kind of reviving the economy that's been impacted by the pandemic. And then the third would be immigration. So while it was a symbolic gesture to release the comprehensive immigration proposal on his first day in office, in reality, President Biden wants to tackle COVID-19 and infrastructure before he puts his administration's weight behind an immigration bill. The second factor that might impact the timeline is immigration is a highly partisan topic. What do we mean when we say partisan, bipartisan? A partisan issue is an issue where the parties tend to disagree. The Democrats think one thing and the Republicans think another thing. This can often mean that there's very little compromise on bills related to those partisan issues. A bipartisan issue is a bill on which the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, agree, and where there's more area for compromise. When we hear in the news that a bipartisan proposal has been floated, that means senators from different parties are sponsoring the bill. When we hear that a bill has bipartisan support, that means that members of both parties are willing to vote for the bill. Immigration is a partisan issue. The Democrats tend to focus on pathways for citizenship for a variety of immigrants. The Republicans tend to focus on enforcement and want to make sure that immigrants are following the rules when they enter the United States. And so that's kind of where the two parties, at least the center of the two parties, tend to disagree. Of course, if we think of it as a political spectrum, on the far right, we have conservatives who are opposed to immigration, and on the far left, we have Democrats who want to make immigration far easier than the center of the Democrat Party, even does. So there's always a range. This brings us full circle to the question of what's the timeline? And at this point, it's really difficult to say. The only thing I can say, or that we can know, is that there is a time limit. Each Congress has a 2-year term. And at the end of that 2 years, anything that has been proposed or that's been introduced that hasn't been passed into law yet is archived. The new Congress comes in and they have to start from scratch, including reintroducing things that were still under debate when the previous Congress concluded. That happens every 2 years. And so we're really looking at a 2-year window here. The other factor when it comes to the transitions between Congresses is that the president serves for 4 years. And for another 4 years if he or she is reelected. Within every 4-year presidential term, there are two Congresses, the first Congress and the second Congress. It is historically, the trend has been that if the president's party is in the majority in the first term, they lose seats in Congress in the second term, and the other party can take the majority. And that makes it harder for the president and the president's party to pass legislation in the second term of Congress. And so, this term we're looking at especially in the Senate, a very divided Congress, with the chance that both the House and Senate could flip in the next term. That means the Republicans would be the leaders and the Democrats would be the minority. And so the Biden administration knows that they really need to get something done on immigration in this first 2-year window. So that's kind of the cap on the timeline. Now that we've talked a bit specifically about President Biden's immigration proposal and some of the issues that are on the table right now, we're going to zoom back out and look at the process by which a bill becomes a law. So as the Biden administration and Congress work on some of these immigration issues, you'll always have a reference to come back to understand what stage we're at in the process. The first thing to say is that the Congress, US Congress, is made up of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives is the larger body. Its representation in the House of Representatives is based on population, which means that more populous states have more representatives than less populous states. New York State, for example, has about, I think it's 27 representatives in Congress, compared to New Jersey has, I believe, it's around 12. Connecticut has even fewer, right? So in this larger body, representation is based on population. The Senate is the smaller body of Congress. There are only 100 senators, and representation is based, is equally distributed. Every state has 2 representatives regardless of their population. The Senate is really kind of the focus of congressional politics, or when we think about what is this Congress going to get done, it really comes down to the Senate, because in the Senate there is an even split between Democrats and Republicans. There are 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, and Vice President Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote. And since she's a Democrat, the majority goes to the Democrats, but only by 1 vote, which means that to get things done, potentially, there needs to be a lot of compromise. So the first step in that process is that an idea is developed into a bill. Another question we've received a lot is, how did President Biden have a whole immigration bill ready to share with Congress on his first day in office? The reality is, before a bill is made public, many people have been working on putting it together. That can include the president, members of Congress, lobbyists. Lobbyists are people who are paid by companies to advocate for certain policies that are beneficial to companies. Think tanks, which are nonprofit organizations that usually focus on specific issue areas and do kind of research and policy advocacy around those issue areas. Constituents like you and me, members of the public, the president or members of Congress might receive letters from constituents that say, this is how I feel about this policy, it would help me in this way. Or a member of Congress might attend a town hall meeting in his or her district or state, and a constituent might say, immigration really matters to me for this reason. And that will kind of make its way into and influence the design of a bill. The other group that really has a lot of sway here are advocacy organizations, also focused on specific policy areas where they're really advocating for a set of policies. After an idea is developed into a bill, that bill is introduced. This is that formal mechanism, the procedure by which a bill begins to be considered in Congress. Before a bill is introduced, we might hear about a bill even before it's introduced, as is the case with President Biden's kind of immigration proposal. We're hearing a lot about it. The news is talking about it. We're talking about the feasibility that it would pass, but it hasn't been introduced yet. So none of the formal process of consideration in Congress has even begun. So this is a crucial first step. Third, the bill is assigned to a committee. This is the first thing that will happen to a bill once it's introduced. Each House of Congress is broken into a series of committees, and each committee is focused on a topic area. And this allows, Congress to break into, smaller groups to discuss and hammer out details, rather than taking up the time of the entire House or the entire Senate on reviewing every single bill, which that would be too time consuming. Nothing would ever get done. So we have committees. In both the House and the Senate, the committee that reviews bills related to immigration is the Committee on the Judiciary, also sometimes called the Judiciary Committee. It's important to note that, we'll also hear the term judiciary used in reference to the US court system and to judicial review. This is the power of the court system to review the laws that Congress passes or the regulations that the president puts in place. That is all separate from the Judiciary Committee. They just share the name. So don't get those two things confused. The House and the Senate Judiciary Committees don't have anything to do with the US court system. So the next thing that's going to happen to this, or that would happen to an immigration bill that was introduced, is that it would be assigned to the Judiciary Committee and the respective House. We often hear the term, a bill died or a bill is going to die. What does it mean? There are several stages in the process where a bill might stop being considered. And that is what we mean when we say a bill dies. The bill isn't being considered anymore. And it can happen both because a bill fails a vote, it doesn't pass a vote, or because procedurally a committee or the House or the Senate can decide just not to move forward with it anymore. And it's not like they voted, it lost a vote necessarily. It's just that they decided not to move forward with it. So for example, in committee, a bill can die. And that happens when either the committee votes to table the bill. That means they don't want to deal with it anymore. They're going to put it aside. The bill dies. It's not going to move forward through the process anymore. Or once the committee has debated the bill and they've made the necessary changes and they're ready to send it off to the whole House floor or the Senate floor, they'll vote on it. And it could fail that vote, in which case it would die there as well. And it would never make it to the full floor, the full floor of the House or the full floor of the Senate to be debated further. But if a bill does pass through committee, it will go to the full floor of the House, full floor of the Senate. And what do I mean when I say floor? I refer to the entire group. And literally it means these chambers in which the two groups meet. It goes to the floor. Once a bill goes to the floor, it's put on the calendar. This happens differently in the House as opposed to the Senate. In the House, the party leadership decides to put something on the calendar. And that essentially just means that it goes on to the list of bills that can be brought up for consideration on the House floor. And then it really depends on kind of, the party leadership and political will, which topics get addressed in which orders, which bills are brought up first. In the Senate, by contrast, when a bill is put on the calendar, that happens through a motion to proceed. The senators have to vote to put a bill on the calendar. A single senator can object to putting something on the calendar, which can kind of put it in a holding pattern where it never goes on the calendar and then never comes up for debate. So that's one place in the Senate where just a single person can really stymie debate. They can keep things from moving forward and gum up the works. Once a bill is on the calendar and then it's brought up for debate, it's debated on the floor of either the House or the Senator, and representatives and senators can offer amendments. Amendments mean changes to the bill. It's important to note that at every stage of the process I've talked about so far, the party leadership and then specific people called whips, and whips are representatives and senators who are designated to kind of keep track of who thinks what about each bill. So the whips will go to their colleagues and say, are you going to vote yes on this? Are you going to vote no on this? What are your reservations about this? And that's happening constantly. So someone always has their finger on the pulse of a bill in both parties. So when it comes to offering amendments, which happens during debate on the floor, but can also happen in committee, when it comes to offering amendments and making changes, this is a time when the leadership of both parties is trying to, is keeping tabs on what different members are thinking and proposing. It's also a very strategic opportunity either for the two parties to come together and propose amendments that would make a bill more appealing to both parties. Or if a party really wants to block a bill from going through, they could attach an amendment that would make the bill so unappealing to some senators that they couldn't vote on it. This is where the idea of third rail issues really comes up. A third rail issue is an issue that's so divisive that most members of Congress won't touch it because it's too risky. It refers to the tracks, train tracks. The third rail is the one that has the electricity in it. And so it's very, if you touch it, it will electrocute you. It's very dangerous. A third rail issue is an issue where, either a member of Congress's constituents don't agree on the right path forward, or the people who are funding that congressman. Campaign finance is a huge piece here. The people who are funding that congressman's campaigns to stay in his or her position, they might really disagree on the right approach. And so if a member of Congress were to publicly have an opinion on that issue, it could really undermine his standing with half of his constituents or half of his funders. So that's what we call a third rail issue. Strategically, members of Congress can attach amendments to bills that include or touch on these third rail issues, such that even if a member of Congress agrees with most of what's in the bill, they're still not going to be able to vote on it because it includes that one crucial amendment that touches a policy issue that they don't want to go near. So this can be a very kind of strategic point in the life of a bill in terms of whether it's going to be feasible for it to pass, or whether, again, it's going to die because it loses the necessary support to move forward in the process. After a bill is debated, the bill goes to a vote. And this is relatively straightforward process in the House. But in the Senate, it gets a little more complicated because the Senate has very specific procedures that govern how a bill goes from being debated to being voted upon. And a lot of the conversation happening in the media right now about the feasibility of immigration reform in this Congress hinges on this specific aspect of the legislative process in the Senate. So I'm going to focus on that in a little bit more detail. How does a bill go from being debated to being voted on in the Senate? Again, the thing to remind everyone is that this Senate is a 50-50 split. The Democrats have a very narrow majority. And so there are two procedures in the Senate that mean the Republicans can do a lot to block, even though the Democrats have a majority, the Republicans can do a lot to block legislation from passing that even 51 Democrats would support. These two procedures are the filibuster and the cloture. Filibuster is the right of the Senate to have unlimited debate. One senator can want to continue to debate a bill, and that will keep a bill from going to vote. They have the right to do that. The cloture rule was introduced about a century ago because, as you can imagine, the filibuster was taking up so much time. If there was an issue that one senator didn't like, they could really gum up the works. They could make it take forever to move forward on a bill. And so the cloture rule was introduced. The cloture rule allows senators to close debate with a 3/5 vote. That's 60 votes in the Senate. So even if one senator was like, I want to keep talking about this, guys, I'm not done yet. I'm going to hold the floor, not ready to finish talking about this. 60 senators could say, but the rest of us are done. And so we're going to vote to stop debate. And that would overrule the one senator who was trying to continue to debate. The cloture rule means that even though the Democrats have a majority, they have 51 votes, they're still going to need 9, 10 Republicans in order to move a bill from debate to vote. And so there are a couple different factors here. It could be that the Democrats can never get enough support to move something to vote, and so a bill would die in the debate stage before it went to vote. Or it could be that the Republicans, if they opposed a piece of immigration, an immigration bill, would only vote for it to go. They would only vote for it to go to vote once they were sure that it would fail, right? So they'll allow it to go to vote because they know that it's not going to pass. This is, again, where whips really come in. Again, throughout the process, you have people whose job is to keep an eye on who's going to vote on what. And it's really a game of strategy that's happening behind the scenes. And that's why in the media, we hear a lot, this bill has no path forward, or this bill's dead on arrival, is because from the very beginning of the process, for example, from January 20th, when President Biden shared his immigration plan with Congress, from that point, a lot of people were saying this bill has no path, this bill's dead on arrival. And it's because they were looking forward to this moment in the process when the Senate would have to vote to bring the bill from debate to vote. And they were saying, you're not going to be able to get those 10 votes to those 10 votes required to get to 60 in the cloture. So it's super procedural. There are a dozen extra layers of complexity on top of this simple explanation. But the thing to keep in mind and to come back to, as we hear in the media about immigration reform, is this specific part of the process, which really has the potential to hinder President Biden and the Democrats in Congress from passing certain immigration reform that they would like to. So the next stage is that the bill is voted on and passed or not in the House and the Senate. And what's critical to know is that a bill needs to pass in both the House and the Senate. It needs to be the same version of the bill that happens in both the House and the Senate. So you'll see, because these two houses are separate and the process is happening separately in each one, it could be that, certain amendments are offered in the House and then the bill passes, but different amendments are offered in the Senate and then it passes. And you have two different versions of the vote or of the bill. And what happens when the two houses pass two different versions of a bill? The bill goes to what's called a conference committee. This is a committee that's made up of members of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And they come together and look at the two versions of the bill they passed, and they say, okay, how do we get this to be the same version? What needs to change? And they'll make all these proposals. Again, the party leadership is going back to their party in the House or their party in the Senate, and they're saying, this is what we're thinking. Would you guys support that? So that they are confident that the changes they're making in order to make the two separate bills the same version are going to have the support they need to pass a final vote. That's what a conference committee does. Once the conference committee members are sure that they've got this final version, they're pretty sure that their party in their respective House of Congress is going to vote yes on it, then it goes back to vote in both the House and the Senate, and it needs to pass in both the House and the Senate again. Once the same version of a bill has passed in both the House and the Senate, it goes to the president, and it needs the president's signature. The president has 10 days to either sign the bill and it becomes a law, or to veto the bill. If the president vetoes the bill, they're essentially saying, I don't support this. If the president vetoes the bill, I'm going to go forward one slide. If the president vetoes a bill, Congress can override the veto with a 2/3 vote. Both houses of Congress have to do this. And this is essentially Congress saying, we hear you, you don't like it, but enough of us agree on it, a super majority of us agree on it, and so we're going to pass it. Congressional overrides of presidential vetoes are relatively rare in US history. The president has 10 days to sign a bill or veto it. If it's vetoed, Congress can override it. If the president just sits on it for 10 days and doesn't do anything, it automatically becomes a law. So, we hear a lot about this in the news, and, when you Google immigration bill 2021, you get thousands and thousands of Google search results that can be confusing to work through, to know, which sources are authoritative, which sources are telling this from a certain political perspective. And so if you ever want to know what's the status of a bill that's been introduced to Congress, I recommend coming to Congressgov. And I'm going to pivot to show you how this website and search tool works. Essentially, you can search by all Congresses. That would be looking at US history, anything all the Congresses have done. Or you can search by the current Congress. And I'm interested to know what the current Congress has introduced related to immigration. If I know a specific search term, I can enter it here. Or I can go down to some of the common searches, more broad categories. So for example, I'm interested to know which bills have been introduced, which means they've gone through the formal process of being introduced for consideration in Congress since the beginning of the year, since this current Congress began. So I'm going to click introduced. And then this will show me everything. You can see that already 1,300 bills and resolutions have been introduced, right? Which speaks to the volume of things that are introduced that will never kind of make it into final iteration. If I recall correctly, in the Trump administration, or in the last Congress, not in the Trump administration, in the last Congress, of everything that was introduced, only about 400 passed and went into kind of law. And so you can see that just because something's introduced does not mean it's going to make it through the process. This is everything that's been introduced. I'm going to look specifically, I'm interested specifically in immigration. So if I move down here, it gives me a couple ways to filter this search. I'm going to go to subject policy area. I'm going to click show more so I can see all the options. And you can see there are lots of them. I'm going to go to immigration. And this shows me specifically the bills and resolutions that have been introduced related to immigration. And if we go, you can see there are only 14 of them. I will warn that this is, behind this website, there's someone who's putting this information in a computer, so it can be outdated. Things can be tagged incorrectly, meaning whoever input this specific bill or resolution didn't tag it as an immigration bill or resolution, so it wouldn't show up here. If you're looking for something specific that you don't see here, you can always use the search to try to find it. But generally, this will give you kind of a lay of what's already been introduced. And so we'll ignore resolutions because they're not very relevant to this specific conversation. We'll look at the bills, and you can see down here that the tracker shows you it's been introduced. Has it passed the House yet? Has it passed the Senate yet? Has it gone to the president? And has it become a law? If you click on the title of the bill, it brings you to an even greater summary page. You can see the text. You can see the text of this bill. You can read it. And you can see the actions. So if we come here, we'll see that this was introduced in the House and referred to the Judiciary Committee, which is the committee that will receive all immigration proposals. Finally, you can also see who's co-sponsoring the bill. This specific bill doesn't have any co-sponsors, but some of the larger bills, the more comprehensive ones, typically do include co-sponsors. So what are our takeaways? Since President Biden announced his immigration bill, Congress hasn't taken further steps on it. There have been some other bills that have been introduced, notably one related to DACA that was introduced last week. But the comprehensive bill that got a lot of news coverage in the first days of President Biden's term has not been introduced. An elimination of the 1-year asylum filing deadline and a request for new funding to address the asylum case backlog. Those two aspects of the proposal have not been introduced into Congress. This is one of many legislative priorities for the Biden administration. So when we think about kind of a timeline for when this will be addressed and the political will to address this issue, it's competing with a couple other issues that are also priorities, including COVID-19 and the infrastructure bill. It is extremely likely that we'll not see kind of the US Citizenship Act of 2021 as President Biden laid it out. We won't see that introduced in Congress. Instead, we're going to see this addressed in pieces and in parts. And it's unlikely that all of the provisions that are currently in the proposal are going to make it into final laws. These are kind of the four main takeaways. Again, we hope that this video can be a resource for you to return to as immigration is picked up in Congress and as more bills are introduced, for you to understand where in the process a bill is. And if you have questions about the kind of regulatory process and what the president can do without Congress, please check out the video in the description below. We are open to receiving any questions. Please don't hesitate to ask them. We have a standing kind of information hours where the REEF team is available to answer any questions on the spot. If you want to talk to us, over a Zoom, in person, that happens Wednesdays, noon to 1 p.m. And the link to join that meeting is on the homepage of our website. If you go to the link on the homepage of our website, it'll take you directly into the Zoom call where you can meet with us Wednesdays from noon to 1 p.m. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more resources in the future.